So you are in New York City, right? And you're getting ready to go on vacation, but you live in New York City.
I've lived in New York City all my life. Never left.
So you
Never
grew up
left.
there?
I was born in the Bronx.
Okay.
Uh, 5 years in the Bronx. My family business is there. We have a bakery. My grandfather started a bread bakery up in Little Italy, so my brothers took it over. It's actually kind of famous little Italian bread bakery. And so my father did that mass exodus when he made money to the suburbs. So at 5 years old, we moved up to Westchester, and I was raised up in Westchester.
Oh, okay.
And then went to Sarah Lawrence College, which is outside of New York City in Bronxville, all girls school. It was a perfect school. And then moved into the city right after I graduated school. So I never really left the New York metropolitan area.
All right. Well, I know that you shared all of this, I'm certain, where we met, because you and I met 10 years ago in Provincetown,
My
Massachusetts.
fated summer. That was a magical summer.
Yeah, and I remember you and I were kind of traveled in the same social circles.
Yes.
And I remember we spent the day, just you and I, at the P-Town Inn pool, hanging
Yes.
out, and I'll never forget that. So I'm sure that you had shared all of this information because I'm always asking people about their
I'm sure
child.
I've shared it. My Gemini moon must have shared it with you at least twice. I repeat things often. So yes, and I forget things just as often. So
So
it's
Provincetown is, for people that are listening that aren't familiar with it, Provincetown is in Massachusetts. It's at the tippy tip. Massachusetts has like that hook, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And as you drive down that hook, it becomes less and less populated until it's just sand dunes. And then suddenly when you get to the very tip, boom, Provincetown. So how would you describe
it's the end of the
Provincetown?
world. Oh, it's a magical fantasy place at the end of the world where outcasts and creative people go, people who feel like they're on the fringe of society, people who have high creativity who aren't accepted, who go there to explore, who go there to be welcome, who go there to be accepted. It's a magical place. The lighting is kind of bizarre. You can escape into a fantasy world. You can escape into a fantasy world of high creativity and community, or you can escape into a fantasy world that spirals you into the depths of depression. Provincetown is highly sensitized. Whatever mood you're in, Provincetown will heighten. So you have this magical kind of energy. But if you're in a depressed mood, it will make you also spiral down. It's quite a unique place, and a community, a safe haven. It's a little different now, but that's how my impression of Provincetown from when I first went, and from the history books and from reading it. Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams and all these great writers used to go there. It was a haven for creative people. LGBTQ LMNOP is the community right now, but back in the day, just a community, but now it's encompassing everything. It's a little different now, but
Yep.
it's still a place of acceptance.
Yeah. My experience in P-Town, I was a visitor for the years. I would go for a week on vacation where it was party, party, party. And then starting in the summer of 2009, I got a place there. So not only was I there on weekends, but a week before my first place started, our work situation changed. So I was now working from home. So I basically moved down there. And I will tell you that being there changed my brain. Like it rewired me. And I don't think that I would have pursued this creative life as an artist that I'm doing now if that had not happened. Because when I was living in Boston and working like a corporate job, your mind is just wired in a way it's just different. And when you go there, I was meeting people that were much looser, much freer, much more open to new ideas. The other thing that was extremely interesting is no one talked about their jobs. No one talked
No,
about what they did for a living.
no.
I hung out with Greg and Jeff, and I hung out with them every day at the summer for an entire summer. And then at the end of the summer, they invited me to a party in Boston, and I found out that they were a doctor and a nurse. And I'm like, I cannot believe that we spent that much time together and it never even came up what we do for a living. And in the normal world, that's the first thing you ask when you meet someone.
Oh,
What do you do for a
Rick,
living?
you hit the nail on the head. That's a wonderful definition of Provincetown. What I loved about it, because 10 years ago was not my first time there, but the time that changed my life. And nobody asked you what you did. You were accepted for who you are. And that's what I loved. You had friends, and when you find out what your friends do eventually, because eventually you do, you hang out with them for months and months and then years, and so you get to know everybody. Everybody was from a different socioeconomic background, but nobody. And I love the fact that people just liked me for me,
Yeah.
because of being an astrologer, a lot of people were like, oh, that's a little crazy, and people don't like that. But they loved me, so I felt loved and accepted, and it didn't matter to me what they thought about my job.
Well, good. Well, let's
And
talk about let's talk about your job a little bit. I know you're an astrologer, which I think I think it's extremely interesting that you are pursuing something that is, at least in my view, very much out of the ordinary. I mean, you're the only astrologer I know. Can you tell me about how that started? Like how you got, I'm going to use the word turned on to astrology, but that's obviously not the word. So you tell me the word. How did it happen? How did your brain get activated around this?
I was always in the arts. I went to school. I always wanted to be an actor, and I studied acting since I was a kid, and movies and fantasy and the imagination. I was very right brain oriented. And so I was an actor in the 80s, and then I became an opera singer. I segued into opera, and I was an opera singer for 20 years. But all during that time and throughout the 1990s, I was always very interested in going to channelers and interested in spiritual stuff and going to expos and seeing what people had to say. And I got a little lured into that Buddhist community for a while, although I found them I didn't stay with them too long. But I always thought there was something. Astrology wasn't for the first 40 years of my life, astrology wasn't really a big thing, but I was always exploring spiritual things through meditation, through yoga, through, as I said, some of the Buddhist things. Course of Miracles, I did the Course of Miracles. I was kind of always dabbling and experimenting, although I did nothing.
Why did you start doing that? And like what age, like approximately what age did you start exploring that? Like
in my 20s, after I graduated school, after I went to a very artsy school, I went to a very progressive school. I came from a very conservative Republican family of alpha males, and I just wasn't like that. But
did you grow up in a religious household?
No, my mother hated religion.
Oh, okay.
Italian Catholic family, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the way the mind was formed, and I'm sure the Italian Catholic mindset in terms of religion was there, but not in a formal way. My mother loathed the church. She thought the church was two-faced. She hated the women in the church. And my father took us to church when we were kids. We're four boys. But then after about 8 years old, he didn't care about the church either. So not religious at all.
So religion and spirituality was not part of your life at all.
No. My parents were hardworking, from immigrant family. My grandparents were Italian immigrants, and my parents were this next generation, and everything was about work, get ahead, get an education, work hard, make money. It was that. I came from that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
But they never, to their credit, my parents never dissuaded me from going into the arts. They just kept saying, "Oh, you should have something to fall back on. You're not going to make any money in that. You're not going to do." But they never, for all their faults in other ways, they were very supportive of what I wanted to do, and they gave me a wonderful education, and they let me pick the college I wanted to. And but when I went to acting and did all this, they just let me do whatever I wanted to do. They didn't stop me.
So I'm trying to figure out where like this interest and need, not that it's abnormal or most people have this interest in spirituality, or, at some point. Is there anything in particular that sort of initiated that exploration, or was it just part of you
Yes.
growing as a person?
In the 90s, I think I missed the first part of your question, but I think I know what you were asking. I did this rebirthing class. I I was trying all these things, and there was a woman teaching a rebirthing class, and I can't even remember what rebirthing was. Something about uh, taking you back into your mother's womb and feeling like you're there, and whatever emotions came out. It was from psychotherapy. And at that point, I was starting to read astrology books, and I asked this woman, I liked her very much, and I said, "Do you know a good astrology teacher? I think that's what my next thing I want." And she said, "Yes, you must study with John Marcusella." And I said, "Okay, he's the best." So I was an eternal student. I loved studying. To this day, I could study, study, study. I could be in college till the day I die, as long as I didn't have to work a day in my life. I'd much rather study. So I said, "Oh, good, a class." So I called him up, and he told me about classes. He was the president of the New York chapter of the NCGR, which is the National Council for Geocosmic Research, which is a very prominent astrological organization. And he told me about classes were starting. And I remember I had a very eclectic schedule because I was an opera singer and I was an actor, and all the classes were at night. And I said, "Aren't there any day classes?" And he said, "No, most people teach at night." So I started studying with him, and this was in the late 90s. And he was a great teacher. And the more I studied with him, the more I loved it. I just thought it was fascinating. And astrology became this whole thing of like psychology. He was a very psychological astrologer. And it was all about, it was like the original psychology for thousands of years. And it wasn't this woo-hoo. It had a science to it. It had a logic to it. It had a lot of math to it. And it was like a melding of the left brain and the right brain, because you do have to do a lot of homework and preparation and math. And then there's a right brain element to astrology. That's the interpretation, the spiritual side, because, why do the planets mean this? It sounds so silly, but they do. And when they move in certain mathematical configurations, and he opened up this whole world to me, as great teachers do. He made me interested in it. He made it exciting. He made it entertainment, and he made it simple as well as complicated. Because the minute you start studying astrology, you realize, oh my God, it's not just this little column in a newspaper.
Right.
It takes years and years of studying and synthesizing all this information to be able to weave patterns together and to look at the past and the present in order to see what the future might bring. Because it's very actually logical astrology once you know the language, just like learning a foreign language. So he opened up this whole world to me. And I'm a voracious student. I'm a very good student. So I took class after class. I studied, and he really liked me. And he said, "You could be great astrologer if you wanted to." And that's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear. I remember when I became an actor, when I became an opera singer, I needed a great teacher. All I needed was a teacher to tell me I was talented and I could do it, and I jumped. And he was that. And I think that's what teachers are so important, because as an actor, as an opera singer, as an astrologer, that I had a great teacher who just pushed me, and they promoted me, and they helped me. So then he started mentoring me, and I took private lessons with him. And then I got my certification, because you can go through the certification process. Not that being a certified astrologer makes you a great astrologer, but it was important for me because I like certification, because I like testing. And I like having to study books and take tests and quiz and get approved and and so to me it meant a lot that I got a certification to be an astrologer, even though it does not necessarily mean you're a great astrologer.
So Joe, when you pursued this, was it something where you knew, I want to be the best, I want to do this? Or was it more like, let's see what happens next, let's see what unfolds, and it sort of unfolded in a positive way? Or were you more goal oriented?
No, I'm not that goal oriented. Let's see what happens. I never have a plan, never. Let's just see what happens. I segued from acting to singing to astrology. And in the interim with the astrology, as I was segueing, I just said, let's see what happens. And I met the right people. I kind of, it was almost like the Wheel of Fortune in the tarot deck.
Yep.
It was just like, let's spin the wheel, see what happens.
Yeah.
And I just got pushed in the right directions. And
How long have
what
you
I
been doing it?
20 years.
20 years. So in 20 years, you have obviously, things are unfolding in a way that are making you want to continue. How would you describe your experience with astrology that's making you feel that this is where you should be, that it is positive, that you want to, you know, that you have wanted to continue to take the next step in a way that maybe other things didn't feel, you know, like,
Okay, I have two answers to that.
yeah,
One's a spiritual answer and one's a very practical answer. The practical answer, I make money at it. I'm independent. I'm free. I don't have a boss. I can do whatever I want. I can make my own schedule. I don't have to listen to anyone but myself. I could work at 3 in the morning. I could work at 9 in the morning. I could take 2 weeks off. My whole business is word of mouth. So from a practical level, I love the freedom. I love the freedom. From a spiritual level, it's creative. I help people. It's like being a therapist. I get great satisfaction out of people telling me that I've changed their lives. I get great satisfaction out of having psychological discussions with people about their potential and what they can achieve. I feel like an artist. I feel like a teacher. I feel like a performer. There's a part of it that brings in opera and the theater because I teach classes and I get to impart my knowledge and my passion for this to other people. And I see them coming alive. It's like an actor in a performance, and you watch those students and you watch those, they respond to what you're saying and the passion. And I'm not counting numbers all day. I'm doing something that's very creative. I think anything you can do is creative. I think you could be a creative accountant. So I don't want to belittle any other professions. But I always wanted to stay in a field that made me, where I got rewarded financially and spiritually from the feedback I got from people. And this is the first time it happened, that
right,
all of a sudden the two of them combined,
right.
And I do like giving people some kind of meaning and explanation. You know, astrology is like a religion. Religion is just something that offers explanations to people of why we're living here on earth. You know, that's what religion's about. People want meaning in life, and they want an explanation of why we're here. And astrology is that. I had a friend who said to me, there was a quote she said to me, and it was brilliant. She said, astrology is the psychology of geometry. And that's exactly what it is. There's all these geometric patterns happening in the sky, and they set things, they make things, they make you react in certain ways. And I just like pointing out things to people. So people come to me and they think they know they're not crazy when I kind of support what they're going through.
Something that you said to me reminded me of some conversations that I've had with personal trainers. I've spoken with 2 personal trainers, and they have experiences where the work that they're doing with their clients actually transforms their clients' lives. And that's something that you had mentioned as an aspect to what you do, is that makes it so fulfilling in a spiritual way, is that the work that you're doing with your clients sometimes can transform their lives. So I
Right.
just want to know a little bit about, can you just talk to me about that? Because that sounds really interesting and awesome.
Well, it's very personal. It's because you're going to have this deep, intimate conversation with somebody. It's like being in a therapist's office. And when you're able to, when they come to you with most people come to see an astrologer when they're not usually feeling that good. They rarely come when things are great. And they want to know, how long is this going to last? And why is this happening now? And when you can give them very practical kinds of advice of certain types of behavioral patterns that are set up in their chart, is set up in their life at birth, and why they react certain ways in certain instances, and why things are being triggered now. And when you can give them an idea of how long something's going to last, whether it's a difficult situation, whether it's a pleasurable situation, whether this is not a good time, this year is not a good year to open a business, or next year is a better year for the potential for love. When you can, and when you kind of reinforce what they're going through, and that there's a meaning to it and there's a pattern to it, it makes this huge sigh of relief on the side of the client. Like they're not crazy. Like there's a time, there's a season for everything. There's a reason why it's unfolding now. This is the time of my life where I have to learn this lesson. This is the time of my life where I have to learn that lesson. This is a time of my life where for the next 2 years I might experience great joy that's unfettered. And when you can put things in that kind of perspective for people, because everybody goes through these things, some people, you know, have more difficult challenges than other. When you put it in perspective for people, they really love that there's some kind of meaning to the universe, that there's some kind of meaning to their life, and and you can help them get through it by suggesting ways that their personality types would deal with a situation like this. Or how did you deal with this situation 7 years ago? Because a lot of astrology is about, you know, 7 years ago, a similar type of energy was around. How did you deal with it then? Mm. Because now you're 7 years older, you're going to have the same lesson to learn, but you're going to evolve with it in a different way. And there's different circumstances that will, there are different energies here that might help you deal with it now. It gives me great satisfaction to just guide them through that. And it's like this. I'm sure if you talk to a psychotherapist or any kind of therapist, they feel the same way. It's great when the client, you see them grow, you see them understand, you see them accept themselves, and you see them, they don't become so tuned into these fated things that are going to happen, like, oh, just because this person left me, I'm going to die, or just because I lost this job. No, there's much more deeper kinds of reasons for things to happen.
That makes sense. Oh my God.
You're getting a lot of feedback?
Well, I'm getting feedback, and also they're using a jackhammer outside my fucking window. Are you kidding me?
This is the
Can you hear
Aquarius
that?
full moon. I could hear it very in the distance, but I don't hear it that loud.
All right.
If you want to continue this another time, that's fine.
Like literally the worst thing that could happen when doing a broadcast is a fucking jackhammer outside the window. You've got to be kidding me.
It's an Aquarius full moon. Expect the unexpected. It's the hurricane came. You look great, Rick. You haven't aged a bit.
I don't know.
And okay. I love all your cooking.
Oh, I'm starting a new.
All your cooking is so exciting.
Well, I'm starting a new cooking blog, a whole new platform.
If I remember correctly, you have a Cancer moon, don't you? You have the moon in Cancer. I remember because I did a little reading for you. I remember many years ago. I think you have the Cancer moon, and the moon in Cancer is a sign that has a lot to do with cooking and home and bonding and nurturing and hunkering down and being in the womb, and the moon is how you would relate. The moon has a lot to do with sensitivities and feelings and needs, and that Cancer moon would be like a big mommy. I have these mommy tendencies of wanting to cook and nurture and to make people feel comfortable and make people feel welcome. And I'm almost positive you have a Cancer moon.
Yeah, so I'm actually starting a whole new, because I get a lot of feedback on my cooking stuff. I get a lot of feedback. So I'm actually starting a new cooking channel. So
that's fantastic.
So it's actually a whole program. So it's called Buckman Street Kitchen, and it's all about helping people cook at home and not eat out and cook from scratch. And the foundation of the whole thing is I tell you what you need to keep in your house at all times. And if you have these things,
I'm telling you, because you have a Cancer moon, this is going to be great.
All right.
You're going to be great at this.
Oh, well, thank you. So I just did the first, I did recordings because it's going to be on YouTube and everything. I did some recordings yesterday for the first time. So I'm starting to create content. So look for it in the next.
What's your sun sign? Are you an Aquarius?
I'm an Aquarian, February 10th, 1968.
You're an Aquarian with a Cancer moon. How interesting. Nice.
Okay.
You'll help people see the bigger picture as an Aquarius to cook in their own home and take care of themselves personally. That's a lovely combination.
All right. So I'm going to have you back. I think I may be doing a podcast for my cooking show called Buckman Street Kitchen. So I'll have you back on that, and we can specifically talk about how that relates to my cooking.
My God, you should see. And I come from a baker's family, bread baking family. Addeo Bakers up in the Bronx. Look them up. They're a big bakery.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, no, my family, my brother took over the family business, Italian bread bakery. That's the family business. Everybody thought I would go into it. I didn't want to go into the family business though.
Right.
Baking.
So let's actually, I want to talk about Joan Crawford though, because I know that you're a Joan Crawford fan. We obviously, when we spent that day at the P-Town Inn, which by the way, I'm working on a painting right now on the P-Town Inn, which is interesting that we're having this conversation. That's where like our friendship blossomed. I'm sure that you talked about your passion for Joan Crawford. I have never been a huge fan in that I just have never seen any of her products other than I saw Mommy Dearest, which doesn't count. And I think I may have seen Mildred Pierce. So I have to tell you what I discovered. So I discovered Joan Crawford, and this is what turned me on to Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford she wrote 2 autobiographies. The second one was called, I think it's called My Life. And
My Way of Life.
My Way of Life. And she wrote it after her Pepsi husband died, and she was living in the downsized apartment in New York. She did an audiobook that she reads. So I found this and I thought it was incredible. And I use it all the time when I need to fall asleep. I put on Joan Crawford talking about my life, and it is so soothing, it puts me to sleep.
She has a beautiful speaking voice.
She's a great speaker. She has a great voice. I have to tell you, I totally am similar to her, the way her brain works. She's like a project manager. She does not necessarily have a creative brain. Everything about her. Now, obviously, an autobiography isn't necessarily about truth, but it certainly speaks to what she thinks is important, you know, and it's not the normal stuff. It's all about planning and thinking ahead.
All about planning.
And all about planning your house, planning your meals, planning your career, planning your relationships. It was fascinating.
It's interesting that you say that she doesn't have, I don't know if did you say creative mind? It's interesting. You said she's very left brain.
Yeah.
She's very, you would think because she was this actress and everything, she would have this kind of a little more of a devil may care attitude about things. But no, she should have fucking she should have been the CEO of a corporation. She should have run. I remember people reading about people who met her and people in Hollywood. People from Broadway would come to Hollywood and they would feel like they were slumming. And they said, but Joan Crawford, when I met her, she should have been running the studio. There was something robotic about her. There was something, I mean, I hate to use robotic, sounds terrible because I actually love her. But organized, anal retentive, 24/7 planning, OCD, which, fits in with a lot of the image of her, especially the Mommy Dearest image, of, the controlling. But yes, very, very left brain structured, analytical, to an kind of almost a scary degree, which propelled her ambition too.
Absolutely. And so since I started listening to that, so then I started learning more about her, and I listened to an audiobook of her first autobiography, which was written like mid-career.
First autobiography was written around the time of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1961. That's called The Lonely Life.
Okay.
So that was written around the.
No, that's Betty Davis.
No.
The Lonely Life is Betty
yes,
Davis.
You're right. It's called. You're right. I'm confusing the two. A Portrait of Joan. It's called A Portrait of Joan. Betty Davis and Joan Crawford wrote an autobiography around the same time about Baby Jane. Betty's was called The Lonely Life. You're right, and Joan's was called A Portrait of Joan. And that was like the early 60s. And then My Way of Life was written in 1970, around that time.
But so the thing that was interesting is, so then I read that other autobiography. Then I started reading interviews about her and seeing interviews. And then I started watching her movies and just learning more about her and then really understanding how she came from absolutely nothing. and that is how she became what she was. I
She's
mean,
the epitome of the American dream. She's the
yes.
epitome of the American. She's one of the most fascinating creatures of the 20th century. Came from nothing, poverty, and the American dream was you can go after whatever you want and achieve it, and that's what she did. From humble beginnings and fighting her way to the top.
And
You know,
being a
she's a
woman.
prime example of somebody who, you know, they say the more entitled you are, if you come from money and family, sometimes you don't push yourself to do things. She came from nothing, so it kind of made this tiger. It made her want to achieve more. And sometimes when you're knocked down in life, you get back up and you have a greater desire to achieve. And that's exactly what she's the living example of the American
Yeah.
dream,
And,
good
and
and bad.
another and another aspect to her is that she's my grandmother's age. Like, I remember going to visit my grandmother, and she was like a little old lady who, both my grandmothers, who they had no power, they had no influence, they were at the whim of my grandfathers. And so that was my idea of what women were like of her generation, and she was their age. So that's
Yeah.
crazy that she had a career, and it's fascinating.
Then, living, the power of the independence of a woman, the power of a woman, and dealing with, making her way in the world. I mean, there's a lot to admire there. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, she's my grandmother's age. Yes, exactly. And uh, what those women had to go through in that world at that time, it's pretty amazing what they achieved. It's pretty amazing. And it really is.
Do you have any opinion on her daughter, Christina, and her in terms of whether, not whether it's true or not? I don't know. What is your opinion on all of that?
Um, you know, Joan Crawford's a very flawed woman. I mean, complex, complicated woman, which is what makes her so. I have Chris. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of truth to what Christina says. I'm sure she was not the greatest mother. I'm sure she did abuse them. You know, there are 4 children in that family, and 2 of the children have great stories, and 2 of the children have bad stories. That's not unusual. That's not unusual. Uh, that the abuse happened, I don't doubt. My views about Christina, though, other than that, child abuse is horrible. I'm sure she had a horrible upbringing in many respects. But Christina never seems to have anything. She capitalizes a lot on that, and then once the whole thing with the wire hangers became camp, she would capitalize that, and she would. There's something about Christina that it doesn't kind of ring true all the time, uh, and I don't, and you're also see, unfortunately, that movie and that book became just so like a Joan Crawford movie. It became so melodramatic. Um, but Christina just seems to have such a hatred to. She very rarely says anything positive about the mother, and yet she always says she was looking to find love. There's no forgiveness there. It's interesting for somebody who's approaching 80. I think Christina's born in 1939, so she's approaching 80 years old. There's no empathy for the mother, and no understanding, and no uh, there's less. There doesn't seem to be this reflective part of Christina about the whole situation. Uh, but I don't hate. The thing about mom, I have 2 versions. When I was younger, I thought the Mommy Dearest thing was appalling, and it besmirched her reputation. But in a way, it made people pay attention to Joan and research her and see where she came from. It's a very sad story. It's a story of a woman who repeats the patterns of her own mother. Joan Crawford just came from an abused household, and then she perpetrated the abuse again on her own children, and that's rather sad.
Yeah.
It's rather sad that this woman who achieved so much couldn't. Christina makes it sound like Joan Crawford wanted children just for publicity. That's not true. That's not true. You know,
Yeah.
uh, now there's a jackhammer around my
Are
building.
you kidding me?
Yeah, they're doing something on the apartment. You know, it's and she's telling the book through a child's lens too. So I think, you know, you're getting the child. A child is gonna listen. My mother's still alive, so I want to be very careful about what I say here. I remember when I watched the movie version of Mommy Dearest. Now, my mother didn't physically abuse me. I was never beaten. But when I watched Faye Dunaway as Joan Crawford, and I watched certain scenes in that movie, I sat there saying, well, my mother was like that.
Right.
My mother would fly into fits of rage.
Yeah, I don't think that's uncommon back then,
It's
though.
not uncommon. So there's a lot of things taken out of proportion. Like, you know, like, I know, you know, my image of women, you know, I don't want to sound misogynistic here, but I come from a whole line of strong, independent, fierce women that had tempers, that
Right.
doled out the punishment, that wore the pants in the sense of they took care of the house, and they were scary, and they cursed, and they fought, and they hit, and they were like military men. And I grew up, those are the kinds of women. Perhaps, I mean, if you psychoanalyze me, I've psychoanalyzed myself a lot. That's why I love the actresses like Joan Crawford and Bette Davis and Barbara Stanwyck and those strong women on the screen. They're fun to watch. But when you have women like that in your real life, you know, everybody talks about abusive men, and yeah, there are lots of abusive men, God knows. But, you know, I always have been taught, I've always been told, oh, if women ruled the world, if women did this, if women, it'd be much kinder, much sweeter. That's not my view. Those are not the kinds of women I was raised by or had around me.
Yeah, that's my experience too. I mean, in my family, my mom wore the pants in the family. My dad was not an alpha male, and my mom was an alpha female. So so that sort of, and I think that's why I have an interest in similar types characters and seeing it on screen. And I can definitely relate to that, because that was the dynamic in my family. When I hear about like the overbearing, abusive dad, I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
I don't know
Like,
what you're talking about.
that is completely foreign to me.
I mean, my dad had his own issues, but not that. Yeah.
My mom was the one that was abusing my dad. And my dad just sat there and never said anything. And so I can relate to that.
And yet I had great empathy for my mother and her plight. And I think because I think I instinctively understood that women were put in a very tough position, especially women like my mother and Joan Crawford. They're creative. They want to have a career. They want to be very yang. They want to express their masculine side. But by that, I mean their yang side. They want to go out in the world. They want to meet people. They want to have a home. They want to have a job. They want to have all those options in life that men have. And when a woman like that, who's so creative and so powerful, so independent, is forced to like raise a family, and then, you know, my father did tell my mother, no, you can't work. You know, my father had his own alpha side there too. And then they get frustrated. So then it comes out in this rage because it has nowhere to express itself. And so as a little boy, I remember, and I can explain this astrologically from my point of view, but I don't want to get into psychological, astrologically analyzing me right now. But as a little boy, I remember I thought my mother was crazy, but I loved her very much. And I understood her, even though every time she and my father had a fight, I thought she was wrong, because he would go to try to apologize and she wouldn't. And yet I sided with her. I can't even explain this to this day. As a little boy, I had this great empathy for her because I understood the frustration, even though her expression of her frustration was so over the top. And I don't know if I'm making any sense here. It's that weird thing where I loved her and I felt sorry for her, but I thought she was crazy at the same time. And I think that's the explanation of the way women are forced to be put in certain positions. But men are forced to be put in certain positions too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that
Not every man wants to be an alpha male and go out and make a living and support a family. And I certainly don't.
Yeah,
I know a
I
lot of
think,
men who don't want to be put in that position, and they're forced to, and then they become monsters because of that.
yeah. And I think this is a lot of, I think this relates to a lot, and this is another whole larger topic about, which we probably don't want to get into, about like traditional American roles in terms of everything, in terms of men's roles, female roles. And then we talk about it kind of relates to me, not so much sexuality, but like now we're talking about gender identity, which
Right.
it's kind of the same thing. It's like
Same thing. And
females should be this, males should be this, and like that is what is considered excellence. That is what is going to get you to be successful, et cetera, et cetera. But not everybody fits into that. And in the same way, in gender, like I'm cisgendered, like I feel like I'm male, but I can see how if you don't feel that way, like how does that work? Like how
right.
do I
And as
fit
an
in?
astrologer, I love that I can help people see what their strong points are and their options. Where in your life are you more yang, and where in your life are you more yin? And where's the balance of energy, and where should your priorities be? And where are your strengths, and where are you? Astrology is explaining where your strengths are, where your weak points are. How do you balance the weak points? How does the struggle in the chart? A chart will indicate where somebody has a certain amount of talent, and then where they're going to have struggle. Well, you need struggle and talent in combination to make somebody successful, because without struggle, you don't achieve anything. And if you're all about talent and good luck, well, you become lazy. And so a good astrologer is supposed, in a good consultation as a consulting astrologer, because I'm a consulting astrologer, I'm supposed to point those things out to people and show them, like, this is where you will have more success if you push yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's lots of different fields of astrology. There's the research astrologer who will explain why certain things happen in certain epochs of history, and they're doing lots of research analysis, right? I'm not geared that way. That's sort of like the geek or the nerd or somebody who doesn't like to socialize with anybody and spends 24 hours a day, 7 days a week doing research, and then they come up with why things happen. That's a whole nother school of astrology that's really beautiful. But this consulting astrologer is supposed to look at a chart and help unleash the person's potential and for growth and where things are going. And and I think from a little boy, that's what you realized. Yes, I'm a cisgendered man. I'm very proud. And astrology is very good at explaining this kind of stuff. I'm very proud to be a cisgendered man. I like my masculinity. I like my swagger. I like going out there. But underneath, I'm a very feminine kind of yin type of guy. And I think I love that dichotomy that I present. I love that dichotomy, that split point of view of being sort of like this daddy figure, but I'm really much more, I don't like using the word feminine because that's such a bad, but yin energy. Yin doesn't have all the connotations as masculine and feminine, but I'm very yin on the inside. I'm very more that kind of thing, which is why I think I understood my mother so well.
Right. So how do you think your personality type would have worked out in the 50s in the US?
That's a great question. Listen, I was very conditioned at an early age to tuck it in, they say. You know the expression for gay men? When I came out as a gay man, I came out right away. It was very easy. But because I wanted to be, I was very lucky. It was very easy. I came out in the late 70s, and all my young friends say, oh my God, it must have been so hard. I go, no, I went to a very progressive school. My parents dealt with it fairly well for being Republican. Anyway, to answer your question, how would have I dealt with it in the 50s?
How would you have been received? Or how would you have dealt with it?
Fine. I would have been received fine because I would have done the Rock Hudson thing. I would have done the things that Rock Hudson did. All those gay men who made sure that they acted in a hyper-masculine way and could tuck it in. There was in the theater world, there was an expression, tuck it in. You don't want to be on stage and have anybody read you as gay. Not because they wouldn't, the reasoning was, at least the way I interpreted it, it wasn't because you were ashamed of being gay. I was never ashamed, but because, and rightfully so, 95% of the literature is geared towards straight people, and the man is supposed to be able to make love to the woman. And so when you're on stage, you want the audience to believe that you're making love to that woman, and that woman is falling in love with you. And there's a certain, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me, and I'm a 60-year-old man, so I'm coming from maybe a little archaic way here, but I always bought into that, where I didn't like when people could guess my sexuality. Now, I could camp it up just as good as anybody else, and I don't care about that. But when I'm on stage, I want the men and the women in the audience to believe what I'm playing. So in the 50s, there would have been the extra thing of being ostracized for being gay, losing your career for being gay. So what I would have done is what I did in the theater world, is just go to the gym, work on that hypermasculine thing, making sure my speaking voice was a certain tonality so that I would fit in and not get caught. I would have played that game. I'm sure that's what I would have done.
Yeah. So talking about,
scared me, and I wouldn't have gotten married though, because I'm so gay, and I don't think, you're talking about who Joe Addeo is. From who I am today, I would have not gotten married because I couldn't have done that, but I would have played the game and just met women and dated them, but not gotten married.
So speaking of Rock Hudson and being closeted, do you think that, I think a lot of people look at that as, oh, that must have been awful being closeted. I don't necessarily think so. Like,
I don't think so either.
I don't think so. I think that he was, I don't know anything about him, but I don't necessarily think that that was awful. I think that he
hate when people use the modern sensibility.
Right.
I hate when modern people say, oh, what a tragic life Rock Hudson, tragedy. I go, no. I'm sure if you spoke to Rock Hudson in the 40s, 50s, and he was very happy. And yes, he had to do certain things that from our modern sensibility, my God. But no, I think he did what he had to do to be successful.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm
sure there were sad moments. I'm sure, yes, would it have been nice if he could have had a relationship, but I'm sure if we had brought Rock Hudson back to life, I think he would laugh at how people talk about him.
I think you're probably right. I think he probably had a great life. Like, I think that he probably had a lot of attention from people that really, because he was the only gay actor, even though he was closeted. So he probably
who had the sad lives in those time periods? Gay men who came from poor families in the Midwest or anywhere, who had no options.
Right.
Who had no options.
Right.
Rock Hudson had a lot of options.
I agree.
I can't feel sorry for a man of his stature in that respect, and I don't think he feels. But if you're a guy, who lived in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in the 50s and had no role models, and you came from a family, and you didn't know where, those are the people that my heart goes out to much more.
Yeah, I agree with you. I recently went to this place called Allerton Park, which is it's like this estate, and it's just this place out by Champaign, Illinois, and it was developed by this, obviously a gay man, and I think he was born in the 20s or something, but he came from tons of money, so he maintained this estate, and he lived his life with I think it was his secretary or something. And when I read this, and they had their home in Hawaii, and they were like the first gay couple, and there was something about that story. I was envious of it, because there's something about everything being out and everything is gay, and it's just overwhelming and too much. It sounded like a really nice, simple life where they weren't being bombarded with all of this opinions and everyone talking about,
Well, it's the same thing with P-Town. Years ago, listen, I think gay rights and transgender rights and queer rights, and I think it's beautiful. I think this is the way society should be going. So I think everything that's happening is fabulous. But the reason places like P-Town were so popular, because years ago, the gay community, the queer community, had to go far away to escape places where nobody else wanted to go. So you went to the edge of Massachusetts. The clubs you went to in New York were basements. They were dark and dingy. They were on the West Side Highway where the rats lived, where nobody else wanted to go. So you had these secret places that were secret. And when you went there, everybody welcomed you and loved you. And it was like a private club. And you felt like this incredible love from the community. Well, because everything has become much more equalized now, everybody knows about everything, and so you don't have that feeling of being part of a special group of people anymore. Uh, and I know it's an oxymoron. What's the word I'm looking for? It's a conundrum. It's like, well, it's good and it's good. It's mostly good, but then we've also lost something too, because now my grandmother knows about what went on in clubs like the Mine Shaft. I mean, I'm like, I don't really like, some things I just want to be just part of the group.
I totally agree with you. When I came out, it was the summer of 1990, and this was probably the end of all this. It was like a secret society in 1990.
Yeah.
Like I felt special. Like, oh my God, I got the key to this amazing world where the music was different. There was clubs that nobody knew about. It was people were talking about topics people just spoke in different ways. And I feel like, not that I really go out or anything, but I feel like things are much more mainstream. I recently watched this movie called The Queen, which was like a drag contest from 1967. Are you familiar with this movie?
No, I don't know this movie.
So you got to check it out, but it's a documentary, and it was I don't even know if they were, I guess it was drag queens was the term they used. And it was, someone recorded the whole thing. It happened in New York City in 1967. And it was all gay men talking, planning and the dialogue. And it was very interesting because it reminded me, the nature of the dialogue it reminded me of when I first came out, because gay people, it's hard to explain. Like what people talked about was different, because now it's just, everything is homogenized.
Everything is homogenized. When I came out, I was lucky. I was in the theater world, and I was taken under the wing of older gay men. There was this thing about older gay men taking younger gay men under their wing and ushering them in and nurturing them. And yes, some of it was sexual, obviously. But it wasn't really about the older gay men just wanting to sleep with the young guys and toss them off. It wasn't really that. It was more like, no, we want to, we know that it's difficult to come out, and you could have a wonderful life being gay, and we're going to show you what wonderful people are in the community, and how creative the community is, and how many smart, intelligent men there are. And yes, it's a very sexual community, but we're sexual creatures. So it's that whole thing of passing it down. And it still exists, but not to the same degree, because of the way it's all so equalized, right? And that's what I loved about those days. I had the greatest men bring me out into the world. I was just so fortunate. I was so fortunate, so lucky, and that I really missed. That was beautiful.
Nice. Well, I have one last question for you. So I guess we continued our conversation. We were planning on rescheduling.
I know. I don't know what happened. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. We were planning on rescheduling this. I'm not sure if I'm going to edit that out or what, but if I edit it out, a jackhammer started outside of my window that was noisy and physically vibrating my dining room table where I'm recording this. So we were going to reschedule it. It went away. We continued. I do have one last question for you. So is there anyone that you wish you could do a astrological reading? Is there like a fantasy person, dead or alive, that you would love to have that sort of interaction with?
Oh, I really never thought about that, because all the people that I wanted to do, I do anyway. Like I don't even really need to talk to them. I just analyze their charts. But if I were to, I really don't. I mean, you want to say maybe Joan, but I've analyzed Joan Crawford's chart so much. I almost, for famous people, to be quite honest, with famous people, or people in the public eye, I actually prefer to study them in private without asking them too many questions, because they live so. I that wouldn't. I enjoy actually an anonymous. I enjoy the average daily person much more to do that
Okay.
with. With famous people, I like studying them and writing articles on them. Famous people are wonderful to study with astrology, as long as you have a time, a birth time. Because without a birth time, you really can't do anything in any kind of detail. What famous people are great for is, because they live such public lives, you have timelines of events.
Mm.
And famous people live such extraordinary kinds of lives, and very active lives, and a lot of things happen. So they're the great kinds of charts to study and to teach with, because they help the astrologer with their predictive technique on when things happen, because of the way planetary alignments happen. So, but not in terms of interviewing them. One just popped into my mind. You know who I would like to? Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep. I would love to read for Meryl Streep.
Okay.
I would love to read for Meryl Streep, because I know her chart so well, and I think she'd be fun. I think she'd be fun. Meryl Streep, that's the answer. And she's still alive. And she has a time birth chart, and I know her chart very well. Yes, that's the answer.
Really? Okay, good answer.
But I do prefer reading for the everyday layperson. First of all, it's harder, much more difficult. It tests you much more. It tests your mettle, because they don't generally, they don't lead as active a kind of life. And so you have to be much more subtle with the interpretation. It's very hard to read for a person sometimes when you see a signature in the chart, and by signature you see a pattern, and you do see this in charts. That's why you have to be very sensitive in how you read for people. I have this, so I don't mind talking about it. A difficult relationship chart. There are things, and I don't want to go into it here, it's just going to be boring to people, but there are certain things you see in a chart, you go, this person has a difficult relationship chart. Part of the reason they've come into this life, whatever you believe about life and reincarnation, part of the reason they've come into this life is to deal with lessons of love. They're going to need to have lots of relationships that don't work out, because they're going to have to learn certain things. And why? And then the client's like, why do I have to do this? Well, that's the mystery. I don't really have it. But the more they work on it, the more they grow, the more they learn lessons, the more they become more into it. So certain people have certain people have very challenging job charts. They can never hold a job. And you often do see this, But then certain types of personalities will work through things a little differently. And it's my job to kind of point, especially if a client comes back to me often. If they come back to me twice a year and they've been coming to me for 10 years, it's my duty to point out certain things. I might not say certain things in a first reading, because you have to know how you're reading for a person. You have to know if the person you're reading for is a very sensitive type, or if they can take it, if they can take a more direct type of approach. That's why my acting background, and now we're finally getting to kind of stuff that I thought I was going to talk about. My acting background helps with this. If you see somebody who has a lot of sensitive type of energy, like a lot of water in the chart, and you can't just say to them certain things right to their face. They're going to receive the energy and feel assaulted, and you want to get them to trust you. So you have to know who you're speaking to and how to speak. It's not about lying. It's about knowing how to deliver the message so that they're going to hear it the way they need to hear it. If I'm speaking to of somebody with a lot of fire, or they're Aries, I'm going to say, you're really bossy and you hurt people's feelings a lot. You really have to know that's something about you. And generally the person will probably laugh and go, yeah, I know. But you can't say that to somebody else who's going to, internalize it a little too much.
Right.
You have to know who you're speaking to.
So it all relates, the acting and the astrology.
It all relates. By being an actor, being on stage, because you have to. When you're talking about certain planets, you have to act out. I like to act out the planet. I like that, because people then see the visual and they go, yes, they get it. The visual along with the verbal. If it's that's where my acting training comes in very well.
So can we talk
So like
about,
if I'm talking about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
so I have a question about being an opera singer. So I've heard you sing. You have performed a couple times in Provincetown. I think once was at the Red Lobster. No, what, not Red Lobster, the
Oh,
Lobster Pot.
yes, I used to just get up and sing.
Yeah, at the Lobster Pot, not the Red Lobster, the Lobster Pot. But anyhow, I do have a question about that. It always, well, I'm curious to see how that relates to the performance aspect of being an astrologer. But also, it just seems like being able to sing like that must feel really good. What does
It
that
does
feel
feel
like?
very. When you're singing, um, when you're singing and it's working on all cylinders, it's like, and especially opera, because I used to sing opera a lot. And you'd go for certain high notes that were the climax of the phrase. Well, it was like having a climax. It was like having an orgasm. It was like the next best thing to orgasm and sex. It was like, oh my God, you'd feel this because your body was kind of shaking and resonating. And then when you go for certain types of notes, it's like explosive, and it explodes this way and explodes down through the root chakra. And you felt like having an orgasm, and it just felt like the next best thing to sex. So uh, when it was working like that, but you had to do a lot of preparation for that and a lot of work. And how, when it didn't work, you would be depressed. But singing was beautiful. Singing is beautiful. It's fabulous. But there's a lot of stage fright that comes with all that too, which I found very nerve-wracking as well. Um, but that's why to be good at anything you do, whether it's opera singing, rock and roll singing, and astrology, you have to do your homework. You have to practice.
How does the opera singing relate to astrology?
The discipline. The discipline of getting up and doing your scales every day and reading. So you do your scales every day. You look at where the planets are every day. What aspects are the planets making today? Well, you have to know where the planets are constantly moving. And as an opera singer, you have to wake up and you have to know where your voice is sitting. You have to do your scales. You have to make sure this is functioning right. You have to the everyday daily living. The everyday daily living of living your art and living your life. If you're an accountant, every day you wake up and you go to the office and you crunch numbers. If you're an astrologer, every day you wake up and you have to read something about the astrology. You have to know where the planets are moving. You have to know what aspects are making. If you're an opera singer, every day you have to wake up. It has to be part of your daily grind. It has to be part of the daily motion. You have to do your scales. You have to take care of your voice. It's that routine. To be in any kind of creative field or any field, you have to do the mundane everyday shit in order to open up the creativity, because you have to have skills, you have to have techniques. So I would correlate all that to from opera singing to acting to astrology to anything you do. My father's a baker. My father was a baker. Every single day he went to that bakery and he mixed the bread and he mixed the dough, and then the creative part came out of producing the bread. But you had to put the flour in, you had to put the water, you had to put the yeast, you had to put everything in that machine, you had to have the bakers do everything. But the creative part was then when it came out and you made it, right? But you had to do all that, have all the techniques and the ingredients. Did that answer your question? I lose the form of the thread of the conversation sometimes.
That was an excellent answer. That was excellent.
But that's there's a great deal of fear in life. Astrology is ruled by the planet Saturn has a lot to do with astrology, because Saturn is about fear, and you're on the planet for 80 years, 90 years, and time is always ticking. And how are you going to get through the world and produce? And when you face your fears, they become your talents. If you overcome your fears, they become they become part of you, and then you can create. If you don't face your fears, they become your limitations. So every single day of our life, we're facing our fears. And I remember as an opera singer, I used to throw up every time I had to sing. It was so fearful to get on stage and to be judged by that audience. And what if I didn't hit but if you don't face your fears, They do become your limitations, and you don't grow, and you don't achieve, and you don't take on responsibility, and you're not productive, and you don't contribute to society. And you know, and I remember that being the scary part about singing, especially. Uh, it was being on the stage, and every single time I get together with a client, even before I did this interview, I'm wired this way. I'm not saying but everybody has this to some extent. Some people worse than others. I'm nervous. I go, what's Rick gonna want to talk about? Should I write notes? Should I take notes? He said to keep it casual. I'm good. And every time a client comes, I've done my homework. I've studied their chart for an hour. I've done all my technique. But I go, what am I going to talk about when this person comes? Because there's a mystery involved to it. You do your techniques, but what are they going to think? I'm a charlatan? Are they going to listen to what I have to say? What do I have? And I'm always nervous before every reading. And I think always nervous. I have to run to the bathroom. Even after all these years, as a performer, I was like that. And I realized if you're not a little nervous every time, you're not going to do a good job. You have to be you can't be crippled. You can't be to the point of being crippled, because you have to let the creative process take over, right? Once you do the left part of your brain and you do your homework and the analyzing and all that stuff, well, then you got to get on stage and perform, or you got to get in front of the client and give them the information. And that's where the creative process, that's where the right brain starts to take over. The left brain does its job, and then the right brain has to take over. But there's going to be a little fear around that, because, I was watching an interview with an actor, Robert Ryan, one of these great old Hollywood actors, and he was doing The Iceman Cometh, and Jeff Bridges was in the cast. And Robert Ryan was about 70, and he was about to die a year later. And Jeff Bridges was at the beginning of his career. And Robert Ryan got on set, and they were about to film a scene, and he was shaking. And Jeff Bridges says, "Are you nervous?" And Robert Ryan said, "Yeah, and I'm always nervous before first take. And if I wasn't, I'd be in a lot of trouble."
Right. I think that there's I hear a lot of people talk about, trying to eliminate nervousness and anxiety and
I've
fear
tried
and
that for years. It doesn't work.
and all of these things. I don't think you need to. I think
you have to let it wash over you a bit.
Right. I think that it's not like successful people don't feel fear or aren't afraid. It's part of being a human. And I know that one thing, not to like bring it back to me, but I know that I do meditation, and one of the things that I do specifically, around meditation is, it's not that I'm trying to feel better necessarily, but what I'm trying to do is remove myself from all of these feelings so that I'm watching them. I'm not trying to control them or prevent them from happening, because I think a level of fear and nervousness, I'm nervous before we started this conversation. That's a good thing. I don't want it to consume me. But, with meditation, I'm trying to feel all these things, good and bad, but I'm sort of trying to look at them like I'm watching a drive-in movie and kind of see them and not let them consume me. But I think that all of those things that you mentioned that could be considered negative are just really part of being a healthy human.
Yes. Yes.
So where can people learn more about what you offer from an astrology standpoint?
Oh, my website, josephaddeo.com, josephaddeo.com. I have my website there. I have a lot of articles there. My classes are posted there. Where I'm lecturing would be posted there. And so that's the easiest way to find me. Also on Facebook, but I have two Facebook pages. Go to my professional page, which is Joseph Addeo Astrologer. On that Joseph Addeo Astrologer Facebook page, I blog a lot about the daily astrology and stuff like that. So you can see, I love to write, so you can see my writing technique and how I write. And if you enjoy that, you'll get a glimpse into the way my mind works and how astrology works.